Want to stop juggling spreadsheets, calendars, and a dozen apps just to run your rentals? Lodgify makes it easy. It's an all-in-one toolkit for hosts. Build a direct booking website, automate guest messaging, and keep all your channels in sync. Running your rental business your way has never been simpler. And for Good Morning Hospitality listeners, you can get 20% off any yearly plan with code GMH20. Just check the link in the show notes to get started today.
Welcome to Good Morning Outdoors, your one-stop shop for the latest news, noteworthy trends, and thought-provoking discussions across the outdoor hospitality industry. From campgrounds and RV parks to glamping, outdoor resorts, adventure travel, and ecotourism, we'll be discussing all things outdoor travel and hospitality, so join us on Good Morning Outdoors every Thursday, wherever you get your podcasts.
Good morning.
Morning, Alex. How you doing?
Doing good. Happy Thursday, everybody. Great to be back with you, Matt, especially after you've been on a bit of an adventure the last week. I know last week you took off early from our special guest episode with Seth and Tori to attend the New York Real Estate Gala. And then why don't you we'll start with some housekeeping there. Do you want to just tell us how that event went and how that experience was going to the city?
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Big takeaway is the power of social media and community, which I think relates to our business of hospitality very well. That's as a former real estate finance professional who tends to lean towards spreadsheets and numbers and look at things in a sort of a cold and calculated fashion. I've adjusted that obviously in my years in hospitality, but it's just a nice reminder to put people at the center of everything and approach everything with a philosophy of hospitality, whether or not it's literally hospitality. So it was a lot of fun. There's 300 people either directly in commercial real estate or tangentially involved in commercial real estate, investors, vendors, brokers, property managers. There's a pretty healthy hospitality contingent, I'd say, between hotels and short-term rentals and restaurants. So I had some interesting conversations, and we'll have some ongoing conversations from that. It's an incredible event. Had some really awesome speakers. Got turned on to a new comedian, actually, Zarna Garg. Apparently she's very famous. I had never really heard of her.
I was just I haven't either. I'm gonna have to look that up. There you go.
Yeah, check out Zarna Garg. She's very funny. She did a few minutes on stage of stand up, and was a lot of fun. And
I'm sure it's nice. I'm sure it's nice being the campground guy in a room of kind of real estate people, and nice to you get to kind of give them a sense of what it's like in our industry in the outdoor segment, and vice versa. You're hearing about a lot of things that we don't probably get to talk about on a daily basis. People buying high rise and multifamily, which you have a great track record in the past on, but I'm sure it's just great to hear what's going on in the industry, as a whole. And as you said, network with people who are active both in real life and then also on social media. So that's awesome.
Yeah, it was fun. And it's kind of surreal where it all originated off of Twitter X.
This is back when X was really Twitter.
Yes. And so, it's funny and kind of surreal, like meeting people for the first time that you've engaged with a bunch online, or, seeing people for the second time. That I
was going to say, was the introduction more, hi, I'm so-and-so, this is my handle, so to speak, of it's
yeah, I mean, ever since I put my photo on as my avatar, people are like, oh, you're the RV park guy. I know who you are. So it's funny.
That's awesome. And then last bit of housekeeping before we get into the news today. Covered Bridge had a great barbecue and beer event in the Catskills this past weekend. Do you want to just tell folks a little bit about that? Again, speaking to kind of the power of social media and getting the community involved and getting people out to the property. I was unfortunately unable to make it, but saw a lot of great photos and stuff from the event. How did that actually end up going? And do you want to give people maybe a little bit of background on what the event was and what you were trying to accomplish?
Yeah, so super high level. This is we've talked about it a bit, but this is a very rustic campground in the Catskills of New York, 2 hours northwest of Manhattan, of the George Washington Bridge. So it's primarily New York City metro-based customers. It's rustic RV sites, 50 RV sites, 23 tent camping sites, primitive, come pitch your own tent. We've slowly incorporated some lodging options, cabins, vintage, renovated campers. We've got some glamping tents on the way. So we've been reinventing this property. It was in rough shape. It was blighted. So we've done a lot of cleanup over the last almost 4 years, just kind of getting it up to a basic standard baseline of being presentable. So we haven't done much to turn on the marketing or really drive a bunch of eyes and a new attendance. We were being careful about that because we didn't, everybody understands this in the world of short-term rentals or hospitality or whatever. That,
I mean, your first impression is your only impression.
Yeah, and you don't want to hit go too early and get a bunch of 1-star reviews and kind of,
it's so hard to recover.
Sabotage yourself. So we were super cognizant of that, and we still have a long way to go, but we're finally in our, approaching our 4th year. We're finally feeling like, all right, let's do some events. Let's turn on some marketing in a big way, and let's promote this thing. And let's, we've had a great relationship with our return customers over decades. And people love us for our supremely unique camping experience, in the wilderness of the Catskills. So this was kind of the first foray into, let's promote it. Let's get some distribution. So huge shout out to my friend, Michael Kaufman, who I know has tuned in here before, but he has done an incredible job. Speaking of community and kind of connecting the in real life community with the web and online community, he's created this incredible local newsletter called Catskill Crew. That, it's a funny story. I stumbled across his newsletter, having known Mike from years prior, subscribed to the newsletter, and then saw his signature on the bottom of the email. Had no idea that it was his newsletter, so called him up and said, "Oh, we got to do some fun stuff. Like, I'm finally ready. Let's do some events." And so this was our first one. I'd say the odds were kind of stacked up against us in that it was our first time. The weather, as early May in the Catskills is usually dicey weather-wise. And then also for anybody who's, in this type of area, it's black fly season.
Right.
So we did, you get some campfires going, get some smoke going, and hopefully there's a breeze. So it looked like there was a chance it was going to be a total washout. It poured buckets for the first 15 minutes, really before anybody showed up. So we set up some rain flies to have some covered seating with some picnic tables. So we teamed up with a local barbecue restaurant called the Smoke Joint, and we teamed up with West Kilt Brewing, who's more in the Eastern Catskills, and it was great. All the beer was gone, all the food was gone. Maybe 70, 80 people showed up. And it was a lot of fun. Got to meet some neighbors, got to meet some other entrepreneurs in the area, and it was fun. It was encouraging to do it again in the future, and made some connections. And went right from the gala to driving up to the Catskills to get ready for the event on Saturday. So it was a whole weekend of kind of the same theme of
plus I got to mention your birthday as well. I mean, there's a lot of you were just like slammed with stuff. It was crazy.
Yep. So it was fun. Flew down to New York. Actually caught a ride with one of my campers out of the city, who is a wonderful guy I've become close friends with. Another Mike.
Yeah.
And he has a car service, so he's always shooting back and forth from the Catskills to the airports in the city. So I said, "Hey, let's see where Mike is going to be at on Friday morning." And by chance, he was in the city, so caught a ride with him. Spent some time with him and some of our other campers and a bunch of new friends and neighbors. So highly encouraged. We're targeting it again for mid to late June with our exciting Jupe glamping tents that are going to be showing up hopefully by mid-June. And so we're going to launch those, promote those, throw a party, jump into the world of some influencer marketing and giveaways that I think should make a big splash with those. So, of course, we'll tune everybody in as to how that goes and what our plan is, and do that in public as we like to do.
I love that. I think, great point, Matt, of just showing the power of kind of in-person event activation and getting people involved and kind of taking it from a relationship that you might have with the business that exists online or by looking at a website, making it more personal. I think it the Catskills is a really unique and cool community and such an incredible event that happened. So that's awesome.
Sure is.
All right. I think that kind of wraps up the housekeeping today. But before we dive into some of the stories we're going to cover, just send us a quick comment. Let us know where you're tuning in from. I know, even as we mentioned last week, we're really right kind of into camping season at this point. I don't know too many parks unless you're kind of down in maybe the Florida, Alabama, Georgia area that are kind of slow as you're kind of wrapping into the slow season. But for most of us in the industry, this is high time and time to kind of, everybody's gearing up for Memorial Day. So trust me, I see you, I feel you. And yeah, let us know what's on your to-do list this week and if you've got a park, where's it at and where you're tuning in from today. Our first story that we're going to talk about today really is about the National Park Service. We've talked about them several times now on the show, all the way back when we, discussing Doge and some of the cuts. And this story is along that same vein, talking about a devastating, quote unquote, $1.25 billion proposed cut to the National Park Service as recently released by the current presidential administration's budget. I think this came out probably a few days ago. The National Park Service, of course, has 430 parks. They've got record numbers of visitors coming into their locations. And again, we're kind of compile this news with a lot of the staffing cuts or proposed staffing cuts to the Park Service that we've been discussing with the efforts of Doge. Most of the cuts related in the budget kind of came on more of the operations side and on the maintenance side. Matt, how do you see this? And I guess, can you, again, not we're obviously not trying to get political, but why and which do you think that these cuts are happening? What would make the National Park Service have kind of a 75% reduction in their budget and a cut of about $1.25 billion?
It's a really interesting question that I honestly don't have the answer to. I mean, right. I can
I think
speculate,
most people are kind of grasping at that, trying to come up with why.
I look at this and it's funny because our second story is coming from the other side of this. Right. So we'll talk about that kind of conflicting storylines and headlines. And so it's interesting to see them come out in the same week. What I see here, I mean, it's certainly impactful, right? If this happens, I don't think you can spin it to say it's an overall good thing, because it affects, so much hospitality economy is driven off of proximity to national parks. It's just the way it is. It's some of our best attractions in the United States.
Yeah, and that's about what, a $1.3 trillion industry is kind of the outdoor recreation economy. Right. So this is a large part of the American economy. Right. This is not a small industry.
Right. That being said, however, you look at the contrast of private outdoor hospitality versus public campgrounds, and you see parks now getting into cabins and glamping and stuff. The public system is not built to be profitable. It's just not, right? There's constant, and some of it's a good thing, right? There's a lot of CapEx always going on. There's really not that, there hasn't been that tightening of the belt. They're not built to break even. They're not built to be profitable. They're just not. So that being said, I feel like there could be some more efficient operation of these entities and these parks at an individual level. So I'm open to that. And then also I see an opportunity here for, along that same vein, for private partnerships, private sector involvement to bring these things to a break even or profitable level, right? Because if they just they're hemorrhaging money. And if they weren't hemorrhaging money, they wouldn't be a target.
I was going to say, I even remember from a couple of weeks ago, we discussed the story of, I believe it was National Park in Arizona, who was like raising their camping rates by like $10 a night. And it was creating such an uproar, right? You know, as you said, this is the, you know, on a camping or even an outdoor rec, like, you know, you want to go visit the park for the day and pay your $10 or $15 or whatever it is. Like, it's such a cheap way to do it. And it is incredibly cheap. You do often wonder, like, how are they making money? And the answer is like, they're not. It's kind of like the post office. They're operating at a loss because the service is in such a high need or such a high demand to the public that there's a way to kind of square that off. But I think even I've seen, you know, reservation system improvements and enhancements come to the National Park Service. I mean, so much of the time that inventory gets released all at one time, and it creates a really big headache on the staff to have to, like, if you're answering phones to make those calls, or you're having to deal with people in person and handle that kind of like tech and booking customer service complaints. Like, nobody's experience is being heightened because that park ranger or that, you know, customer service agent is having to do that. You know, that's why we have technology and these type of things for a reason, to improve and enhance those experiences. So to your point, you know, these efforts through Doge and efficiency and kind of bringing things into the next sort of generation of technology and things like that, I think that's an opportunity to look at that kind of thing and to direct operational budget to making the parks better. Make sure that they're nice and clean. Make sure that the facilities are running properly. Make sure that there are people there that are informed on what's going on at those locations. So hopefully it's a bit of that conversation, and there's some shifting of priorities, so to speak. And this isn't a full out cut, and we'll find national parks that have nobody around and toilets breaking and trash everywhere and that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. Well said. I also see kind of an opportunity here for new ideas and like people to speak up and talk about this like we are, and people who are, you know, probably much more qualified than us and have much more influence. But it's an interesting conversation. I've always, just generally in business, I've always been a fan of what's possible with, you know, public-private partnerships. So I think there's opportunity here. You know, it's not for a big cut like that by any means, but we got to do what we got to do.
And I think you gotta remember too that, you know, these are starting points for budget talks. A lot of times the initial budget proposal by any administration is not the one that gets decided on, that gets actually put into law. So hoping that, you know, folks, you know, across the board, from the National Park Service to the Outdoor Recreation Roundtable, who we're going to talk about next, kind of come to the table, begin to advocate for the type of experiences and needs that these places have, and can put the right supporting data in front of the right people, that ultimately, you know, cooler heads will prevail and the right decision will be made. And to your point, Matt, you mentioned in our next story here, the Outdoor Recreation Roundtable and the outdoor rec industry also released a press release this week with a much more optimistic outlook on, you know, things that are happening with the introduction of the America the Beautiful Act. So this comes after the Great American Outdoors Act, which was, I believe, released back in 2020 or 2021. This was like right in the middle of COVID, where there was some legislation that was kind of introduced to help with the outdoor rec industry. And this new act that's been introduced is bipartisan in nature. There's independents, Democrats, Republicans, all sponsoring this from different states. And looking to really kind of beef up their legacy restoration fund, and a pool of money that's really going to support deferred maintenance issues in the properties, and kind of ensure that there's funds available to keep the parks and the outdoor rec infrastructure in the industry viable for years to come. So, you know, not only, Matt, what do you think of this new legislation that's getting introduced, but how do you kind of square that up against, we just talked about, on one hand, the budget looking to reduce infrastructure funding and spending, and then this new legislation in Congress that's being introduced that is really designed to fund those type of obligations for years to come?
Yeah. You know, my first thing was to kind of dive in and get into the mechanics of this a little bit. And I think that's important to note that the first story, the budget cuts, proposed budget cuts, that's the Trump administration. That's, you know,
right. That's a presidential
executive
action.
branch. And this is coming through congressional leadership. This is a group of senators. I think important to note that it's bipartisan.
Mm-hmm.
We have Steve Daines, Republican from Montana, Angus King, an independent from Maine, Kevin Kramer, a Republican from North Dakota, and Mark Warner, a Democrat from Virginia, who are leading the charge on this. It seems well thought out. These are all obviously some politicians and senators that have rural constituents and a bunch of rural land, in their
if you caught those states that Matt mentioned in connection to the senators, those are some of the most beautiful areas of our country, both out west and here in the Northeast as well.
Yep. So I mean, I think it's an acknowledgement that, what we all see and believe in this industry is that the outdoor industry at large is a very strategic area to invest in. There's growth. There is a return to nature. It's COVID, but it was already happening before COVID. There's going to be things that last, changes from COVID that, last and are ongoing, and just people's behaviors and consumer behavior and travel behavior changing. So, they're competing kind of stories and approaches. I don't know that they're mutually exclusive, right? I mean, I think it's interesting. Like both could happen, I guess, right? And maybe that's kind of the solution, is we invest money in different areas with a different strategy. It's
right, and I think it's worth noting that this type of legislation was recently introduced. This stuff often does take time to come to fruition. There'll be continuing kind of battles, so forth on how and what gets included in this. They've sort of proposed funding to be expanded to about $2 billion annually through 2033. So kind of the next, let's call it 7-8 years by the time a bill could be passed. But it is ultimately Congress that has the power of the purse, and somebody who is able to proportion funds and make this type of decisions on how and what gets funded and for what reason. So even in the budget proposal that we just talked about that was introduced for the following year, it is still ultimately up to Congress, which at this moment is there's a one-party control in all of those branches of government. So you'd say a more than likely shot that some sort of proposal or solution does become agreed upon. But it ultimately does take acts like this, the America the Beautiful Act, and folks in Congress working together to determine how the funds will ultimately get dispersed. So seems interesting, especially kind of coming off the heels of a 2020 legislation that did begin to fund some of this, and now there's sort of a renewed focus and attention being brought back on it, and advocating for a little bit of an increase in funding to that LRP fund, again, to continue to look at infrastructure. It reminds me a little bit of kind of the all of the infrastructure legislation for roads and bridges and things that got passed a couple of years back, kind of taking that same principle and approach, taking it down to the outdoor rec industry and saying, okay, great, we've addressed those infrastructure needs. Let's address the infrastructure needs of all of our national parks and public lands. So super interesting, as you said. It's kind of competing priorities here as far as which one may ultimately win and which one may ultimately go through in the legislature, but kind of mixed news, if you will. One a little bit more negative, one a little bit more positive, depending on how you look at it.
I think that the latter, the investment, is a way to kind of unite people from different areas, people who live in urban environments and people who live in rural environments, right? A lot of people who live in urban environments love to go out to these beautiful locations and partake in outdoor hospitality. Meanwhile, these investments will benefit the people in those rural communities with jobs and better infrastructure and, investing in their communities. So, we're an economy that's largely based on consumption. So if we can get people from urban communities spending money in rural communities. It's kind of, we said we're not getting political, and we're not, but that's a big part of what divides this country is urban population and rural population. And, I feel like big story in the latest election was the rural communities and population felt like they were getting ignored. And I feel like that had to do with the results of the election. So I think it ties in here with what's going on in our country, and huge for people in our business across from tour operators to, glamping property operators, campground operators, service providers. It's all a very, tightly interconnected business ecosystem that depends on it all.
Really well said. So, Matt, our next story is a little bit more up your alley with a little bit of a financial report. We're, of course, talking about Sun Communities recently releasing their Q1 2025 earnings call. There's a number of highlights. I'm going to touch here on a couple of things and then open the floor up to you to say how you see these results. Really interesting I would say this is kind of a mixed report of kind of how I would take it. There's definitely some positives to look at. Sun recently announced that they closed on that sale of Safe Harbor Marinas. It was about a $5.65 billion sale that they were able to finalize and bring through. But some kind of negative points as it comes to transient RV business, them citing being down, which I don't think is a surprise or a shock to anybody, whether you're a large REIT like Sun or an independent park operator and manager like you and I. Sun has kind of already been kind of signaling and going towards more of that long-term model in their business, liking more of a, consistent, steady cash flow with long-term campers in their business. So I think they were kind of maybe unintentionally preparing for a moment like this and just trying to get, like I said, earnings as consistent as they can. And then also, interestingly enough, they cited their UK portfolio of parks was a little bit down as well. They're citing, higher payroll and real estate taxes is that problem, not necessarily a dip in transient business, but a little bit of a mixed result. Their financials seemed fair and fine. Nothing, I personally didn't see anything super, super alarming, but you tell me, what did these results tell you? And, does this give you any positive or negative hope as we head in for the rest of the year?
Yeah. I think your takeaway can be negative. It can be kind of doom and gloom on the transient side of the RV business. That's been a narrative for, a year plus, maybe even 2 years now, with kind of returning to normalized figures and trends and revenue and occupancy on the transient side since the COVID boom. So, I think this confirmed a lot of things that we already knew or already thought we knew. This actually ties back to a couple weeks ago when I mentioned a really smart talking point from Rafael Correa at the Live Oak
Bank Summit.
Right. I mean, there's indicators here, and a lot of this has to do with the numbers. And I think they sort of predicted this some years ago. And as you mentioned, they've been migrating transient sites to annual or seasonal sites at Sun. And that's part of the story, but also there's a regulatory piece here that I think gets lost in the shuffle that I've been thinking a lot about ever since, talking about this with Raphael. And, they're a real estate investment trust. They're a publicly traded company that has a specific tax designation that transient RV business does not exactly line up very well. So like you read their annual report, whether it's Sun or ELS, and they, similar to like a private placement memorandum, they have to lay out the risks of their operation of investing in them. And one of the top ones is that they lose their REIT status, which is a REIT is designed to make money from real estate rental income. And so this ties back to traditional hospitality years and years ago when hotel and lodging REITs became a thing, like literally became legal to exist. And there's some lobbying done. There's some legislative work to make that all happen. And I'm no tax expert. I think we should try to get Raffo and a tax code expert on here to dive into that, because I think it's super interesting for everybody in the hospitality business. But that's, they're manipulating and making business decisions based on that defensive maneuver of the regulatory side of things. Also, the trends and the revenue and all that is telling them to go in the same direction. But it's so.
And I'd add as well that, like, you got to remember that they are directly competing in a class with another great player in ELS, and then within the REIT, kind of trading market as well. So you're right in that we as people in the industry, and if anybody in the outdoor industry, knows Sun well, but traditional retail investors and people who are probably the largest holders of stocks from both Sun and ELS don't really care whether it's a campground or it's what it is, so to speak. As you said, they're looking for that that REIT and somebody that they can feel comfortable, that has good financial performance, a great backbone. Like that's the kind of market and environment that, as you said, they're having to play in with other things like those investment decisions, regulatory tax decisions, things that we often may overlook, looking at it from maybe more of a hospitality lens, going, guys, you're leaving money on the table. You could be making a lot more by going the transient route, where they've got a lot of other business implications and a much larger portfolio with a lot more inventory and problems that, we just don't have to really consider or look at from our perspective.
Absolutely. Well said.
And then finally, to close out today's show, we've got a couple of pieces of news. One, Matt, I know another buddy of ours that we're good friends with, Robert Preston, at Climb Capital and Unhitched RV Management. He has been on a little bit of a tear here recently. Robert's been in the industry for a while and has built a great reputation for not only owning properties, but now more recently kind of really getting into the third party game in a really serious way. He recently, I believe, announced 2 properties coming on board over this past week into his management arm. Do you have any more details or updates on that?
Yeah, so there's 2 parks in Florida.
Right.
One is a KOA.
Which fits his thesis great. Robert loves the Southeast and is a big player in that market.
Yep. So yeah, one is a KOA, long-standing legacy KOA asset, which I think is really encouraging to see. You and I ourselves individually have been parts of these types of conversations about, talking with mom and pop longtime campground owners that have really great assets, and just the prospect of turning that over to a third party manager is a tough conversation. It's a tough sell. So I love it. I love it for Robert and Unhitched that they're proving it out. They're demonstrating to these owners that they are going to be good stewards of these assets. So I love it. It ties into our prior conversation too about the tax codes and REITs and the investability of the asset type. If third-party management companies can step up and demonstrate that it is an asset type that can be efficiently and effectively managed by third parties at scale, then it turns, it'll turn our asset type in our business more investable. Mm-hmm. So I'm encouraged by it. I love it. I'm rooting for it. The other property was a very high-end 55 plus community, which I think that's cool to see, the kind of how multiple they can be, right? With 2 different types of assets. Really, like I sound like a broken record sometimes when I say that, every single RV park is a truly unique business model, right? There's 15,000 campgrounds or something in the US, there's 15,000 different types of campgrounds in the US. I truly believe that. So it's, you
go from a really high traffic transient location, great brand and KOA, to a probably, easier operation to run in a 55 plus type of property like that.
Right. Exactly. So, it's encouraging. I love it.
I always love to see the transactions move, right? The more kind of deal flow, and these aren't necessarily properties that are trading hands per se, but it's action happening. There's movement. There's a conversation about, what's good for these owners, the industry, seeing what trends and how Robert's been able to run the business and do it. There are definitely others in the space, in the industry, doing a similarly good job. And it's just great to see the market active. I sometimes get a little bit nervous when you're not reading Woodall's or seeing deals happen on LinkedIn or on Twitter or something, and you don't hear about anything happening. And that makes you a little bit nervous, and like everybody's kind of hunkering down and planning for the worst. At least that's sometimes what you think. So it's great to see positive activity happen in this way.
Right. And the alternative would likely be an exit.
Right.
Or, if they can't.
And that might be a bottom of the market sale and put them in a poor position.
Well, right. I mean, you could assume that, maybe they tried to sell and they couldn't get the price they wanted. So then they explored third-party management. But then, if they had explored third-party management and not found a suitable partner for that, maybe they go back to selling, or they say, we just got to hold on for a few more years. And, it's another way for long-term assets to sort of exit, right? It's a different operator. It's a new kind of lease on life. The mom and pop operators can go retire and do what they want to do with their lives. And, because in our industry, right, a lot of times a sale is forced by aging operators who are getting sick, who can physically not operate the property anymore. So this is a solve for that, which is a great thing.
Absolutely. And our final story kind of comes and fits right into a lot of this positive movement in transactions. This isn't necessarily a new transaction, but a new product launched by one of the great PMS and reservation providers in our industry, NewBook, which I can't remember recently, Matt, maybe you do, when they got acquired by Storable. I think within the last year or two, if I remember right. NewBook is obviously, they are based in Australia, in Queensland, and which is a really interesting, unique part of the market as well. A lot of times we don't hear about companies and players in our space being based overseas, but NewBook has an incredible, both now US and Australian operation with travel parks over there. And then obviously with campgrounds and resorts and all types of properties here in the US. They launched kind of a reduction of their platform in some way with the launch of what they're branding NewBook Essentials, a really, kind of streamlined approach to their system. I've been a fan of NewBook for a number of years, have used their platform myself, along with many others at some properties, and they have a really robust system. It has often been kind of branded or coined in our space that NewBook is like, it's the really powerful system if you've got a lot of stuff you want to do, right? You're a multi-park operator, you are a REIT or somebody who has a lot of locations. It's the powerful system that you can use to, get it all done. You can connect all of your integrations. They were able to, integrate with everybody and do everything, and basically the fully customizable system for whatever your park did. But I would say a common kind of notion was that they were kind of only for those people, that there were better systems that were more streamlined, not as much bells and whistles, and just much more, smaller in terms of operation. And I think this is a really smart move for them to create kind of two go-to-market solutions. One, still their classic, as they've always been, system for folks who need all of the bells and whistles, and then this launch of NewBook Essentials for the more streamlined park. Matt, I know you may not be a user of NewBook, but we're big fans of what they have there. How do you kind of see this move, and does it signal something that look, more people are kind of reaching down to the mom and pop pop operator.
Yeah.
They're kind of the last people in the market who maybe have not adopted a reservation system. Beyond that, it's a lot of people kind of moving between systems, right? Just finding the right one. But a lot of the smaller parks are probably the ones left for folks like New Book and others to kind of snap up. How do you see this move?
Yeah, it's interesting, and it's kind of close to home because, I've evaluated New Book in the past pretty heavily. I haven't looked at it in a while, but it was always a budget kind of issue of my parks are too small. It's a great solution. I've heard nothing but good things about it, but it was just never in the budget. So now it sounds like that might be solved for. So speaking about the Live Oak Bank event again, I finally got to spend some time in person with Blake Burris over at New Book, and I've talked with him on the phone over the years, and it was awesome guy to hang out with and get to know a little bit. And so I'll sure be reaching out to Blake to see the new platform and see what they got going on, because I think they're meeting a need in the market, and I love that. So I'm a fan. We'll check it out. Maybe we'll have somebody on to talk about it or something. So I'm excited.
Absolutely. And yeah, congrats to the New Book team on launching that really creative, cool solution. Love the focus on that. And now I think that there's truly something for everybody over there. So Matt, what do you say? I think this was a jam-packed week for us. We talked, national parks, New Book announcement, Sun, Q1 results, acquisition news over at Unhitched. I think that'll do it for us this week. Hope everybody had a fantastic time tuning in with us. We'll be here next Thursday, as always, at 10 a.m. Eastern. But don't forget, check out the other 3 segments of the show happening before us Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday with our, hotel crew, short-term rental crew. We've had some really exciting episodes with some exclusive episodes and guests on the other segments of the show. So do not forget to check those out, especially if you are curious about all things hospitality, hotels, short-term rentals. We've got shows for you every day of the week. And with that, we will see you here back next week for another great episode. Thanks.
Thanks.
Want to stop juggling spreadsheets, calendars, and a dozen apps just to run your rentals? Logify makes it easy. It's an all-in-one toolkit for hosts. Build a direct booking website, automate guest messaging, and keep all your channels in sync. Running your rental business your way has never been simpler. And for Good Morning Hospitality listeners, you can get 20% off any yearly plan with code GMH20. Just check the link in the show notes to get started today.